Tonight on Newswatch, reforming the NSA. A look at the different ways the Obama administration could change its controversial phone monitoring program. Plus, removing all troops from Afghanistan, what the move could mean for terrorism. And you may not know his name, but you probably heard his songs. We'll look at the life of music pioneer Harry T. Burley. All this and more tonight on Newswatch. Good evening. I'm Mark Martin. President Obama has vowed to reform the National Security Agency's controversial phone spying program. The data collection has been a public relations nightmare for the White House and may be illegal. Even so, the administration today asked for approval to keep collected data longer. That as new options for NSA reform emerge. Dale Hurd explains in tonight's top story.
Lawyers for the White House have given the president 4 options for restructuring the National Security Agency's phone surveillance program. That, according to the Wall Street Journal. The options range from dropping the spy program altogether to running it through telephone companies. Faced with an international firestorm over the spy program, the president in January asked his staff to give him alternatives.
I believe we need a new approach. The government collection and storage of such bulk data also creates a potential for abuse.
Under the current program, the NSA collects millions of U.S. phone records from phone companies AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. 3 of the reform options involve who will control the metadata. The 4th scraps the program altogether. Privacy advocates in January said reforming only the telephone spying was not enough.
The hardest thing for the president in this context is the extent to which he cannot satisfy both constituencies, the intelligence community on the one hand, civil liberties advocates and civil liberties organizations on the other.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
John Whitehead is president of the Rutherford Institute, and he's also the author of A Government of Wolves, the Emerging American Police State. He joins us now via Skype with more. John, how do you think the NSA's phone monitoring program should be restructured, or should it be ended altogether?
Well, you can't really restructure it. The NSA is downloading 200 million text messages a day. They've been hyped up on gathering intelligence since the 1970s. I've been writing on the NSA since the 1980s. Anything that we've done on the internet, phone calls, that's all been recorded. They use the FBI to do a lot of the domestic spying. In fact, one of the options supposedly is that the FBI will now collect this data. Well, the FBI has been doing it all along. So really the only way I think you could limit the NSA is shut down the program entirely. And restructure it so that it fits with the Constitution, which is you can't do surveillance on American citizens unless you have a probable cause under the 4th Amendment, which means you have to have some evidence of illegality, and they don't have that. I think that just my study of the NSA over the last 20 years, very, very difficult to shut them down. Their computers are massive. The computers run the show. I've been told by NSA agents. They actually collect the information, parse it, and give it to the agents. So we're sort of in a catch-22, in my opinion. It's going to be very, very difficult to get out of.
Well, no matter how the Obama administration goes about reforming the NSA, the government already has this mass amount of data on phone users like you're talking about. Should that concern Americans?
What happens to people who live in a surveillance state? What's happened in past regimes? I mean, you look at Nazi Germany. They lived in a spy state where the neighbors reported on them. Everybody was nervous to say what they wanted to say. They limited their speech. We're doing the same thing today. I have people who tell me, I'm not going to do this kind of text message because I know the government's reading it. Well, you don't live in a free society. So people are already looking over their shoulder.
Well, what would you like to see happen to protect our freedoms from government encroachment?
Hold the agents of the NSA, the FBI, any of these Secret Service agents to the 4th Amendment. And that we're going to need what I'm calling for is an electronic privacy bill of rights where if they have data on us, for example, they should not be able to use that in a court of law against us. I think that would slow them down, but there's so much collusion in Congress and infighting. I mean, they're having trouble even acting on the 4 so-called solutions that Obama's put out. So I don't see in the immediate, I don't see any type of solution. If we could hold them to the Constitution, that'd be great. In other words, but here's the fear, as I state in my book, A Government of Wolves, we've moved into a police state. What does that mean for us? That means freedom's going to be very, very limited.
Okay. John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, thanks for your insights.
Thank you, sir.
In other news, Texas is the latest state to have a ban on gay marriage struck down. A federal judge ruled today that a voter-approved amendment banning same-sex weddings is unconstitutional. The judge did, however, issue a stay in the case, meaning the Texas ban will remain in effect pending a ruling by an appeals court later this year. Turning overseas, Hezbollah says Israeli warplanes struck its forces in Lebanon near the border with Syria this week, and they're vowing to retaliate. Media reports from the region say the Hezbollah convoy may have been carrying weapons like long-range surface-to-surface missiles. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
At a press conference with visiting German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would not confirm or deny the attack.
Our policy is clear. We will not speak about reports of what we did or didn't do, but we do all that is necessary in order to defend our citizens.
One of Israel's top naval commanders warns that Hezbollah continues to try to acquire strategic weapons in order to influence future battles. One of those targets could be the major oil and gas discoveries off Israel's coast. The Syrian border also continues to be a source of concern for the IDF. Israel's Chief of Staff General Benny Gantz announced on Sunday the Army was replacing one division on the border with one specially trained for the new situation. Gantz described the Middle East as explosive and said a storm is brewing underneath the seeming quiet night and day and on every front. He blamed Iran for most of that brewing storm and said there is no front where Iran is not involved, handing out torches to pyromaniacs with munitions and rockets, and is heavily involved itself in the fighting. He added the relative quiet along Israel's borders was misleading and vowed the IDF would be vigilant and prepared. He said when the state dials 911, the Army would answer. Gantz's statements and the reported strike are two more signs of how fragile the current situation is in the Middle East. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
NATO will withdraw all its troops from Afghanistan by the end of the year. That's if the country doesn't agree to a new security pact with the United States. NATO's announcement comes just a day after President Obama threatened to remove American troops if no peace deal is made. A top U.S. military officer warns this impasse over a pact could be encouraging terrorists in Afghanistan. Army General Martin Dempsey says it might lead some security forces there to form links with the Taliban. And for more on this, we turn now to our terrorism analyst, Eric Stakelbeck. Eric, if all U.S. and NATO troops leave Afghanistan, how do you think the Taliban is going to react?
Well, Mark, right now the Taliban is licking its chops. They are waiting for the day that all U.S. troops are gone. And what they're going to do, Mark, is they're going to go on the offensive. You know, I spoke to a U.S. soldier who recently came home from Afghanistan, Mark, and he expressed concern to me that all of the translators, the Afghan translators who are working with U.S. forces there, look, these guys are going to be, it's going to be open season on them. They're looked at as traitors by the Taliban. That's one example of the kind of thing that's going to go on. Look, there will be a leadership vacuum when the U.S. is gone. The Karzai government is very weak in Afghanistan. The Taliban is strong in neighboring Pakistan. They will regroup, they will rebuild, and they will make another push once again to come to power and turn Afghanistan into an Islamic state.
Well, with all the latest terror threats, it doesn't seem like the Taliban is in the news as often as before, Eric. How is the group still working in Afghanistan and the rest of the Middle East?
You know, very interesting, Mark. We've seen even Taliban forces turn up in Syria, which is very rare because a lot of times when you think of the Taliban, you think, okay, Afghanistan, Pakistan, but we've seen them turn up in Syria. We've seen a plot a few years ago here in the U.S. A Muslim trained by the Taliban in Pakistan was plotting to blow up subway cars in New York City. So Pakistan, or the Pakistani Taliban, has released more and more video and audio warnings to the West saying they are going to expand their operations outside of that Pakistan-Afghanistan theater to target the U.S., target Europe on the mainland. It remains to be seen whether they will do that, Mark, but the intent is clearly there.
Overall, what is the goal of the Taliban?
Well, the Taliban, first and foremost, Mark, they want to turn Afghanistan and Pakistan, those two neighboring countries, they want to turn them into Islamic states, radical Islamic states, governed by Islamic Sharia law. That's the main goal. But the broader goal, whether it's the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Muslim Brotherhood, is to turn the world, Mark, into a worldwide global Islamic caliphate governed by Sharia law, whether we like it or not. That's the ultimate goal for every radical Islamic group like the Taliban.
Okay. Eric Stakelbeck, our terrorism analyst. We appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly has ordered an immediate test of troop combat readiness in central and western Russia. The report did not mention Ukraine, which is Russia's neighbor to the west. Months of protests there forced out the former president. He was pro-Russia. An interim president is now in place until elections can be held. Our George Thomas is traveling through Ukraine, and he's currently in the Crimea Peninsula, an area of Ukraine that is unhappy with the changes being made by those more Western-friendly.
There are thousands of people who are demonstrating here in Sevastopol who are for Russia. They are for Vladimir Putin. And there is a concern that the Russians could potentially, they have about 25,000 Russian Navy that are stationed on the Black Sea, and they are concerned that they could begin to make a move on Sevastopol. Incidentally, in the last 48 hours, the mayor who was appointed by Kiev, appointed mayor of Sevastopol, was suddenly replaced by a Russian mayor. And now remember, this is in Ukraine. This is a Ukrainian city. Today has a Russian mayor.
The Crimea could be the next flashpoint in Ukraine if demonstrations continue. Coming up, after having an Oscar nomination rescinded, a look at how Johnny Erickson Tata is still using a film song to minister to others. Welcome back. The Academy Awards ceremony takes place this Sunday, but it won't include a musical performance by Johnny Erickson Tata. Now, she received a nomination for the inspirational song Alone Yet Not Alone. The Academy withdrew it over what some are calling a technicality. Charlene Israel caught up with Johnny at the recent Movie Guide Awards in Hollywood, where she performed the inspirational hymn.
Author and speaker Johnny Erickson Tata felt honored when she was approached about singing a song for a new Christian film. The song, Alone Yet Not Alone, is the title for the film of the same name. The true life movie tells the inspiring story of two women and their journey of faith and survival during the French and Indian War. Leading through the wilderness. A diving accident in 1967 left Johnny a quadriplegic and in a wheelchair, something that made recording the song a big challenge.
My lungs don't work very well. I don't have a lot of strength physically, but you do, Lord Jesus. Let me borrow your lungs, Jesus. And he certainly gave me his strength.
Johnny's rendition of the song was so good, it received an Oscar nomination for Best Song. But the Oscar nod caused an uproar in Hollywood and fueled questions about why a little-known song, sung by an unknown artist, could receive such recognition. The Academy investigated and later pulled the nomination, saying composer Bruce Broughton used his influence as a former Academy governor to get the nomination. Broughton says all he did was send an email asking others to consider the song. The Academy president said sending the email crossed the line because it gives the appearance of an unfair advantage. Broughton says that's ridiculous.
If you actually read the rules, and you can go on the Oscar.com website and read the rules, I didn't really break any rules. What I admit to doing was sending some emails to people who would probably who I thought would likely overlook the song. They don't agree with me on what I did, and that's basically what it is. As far as the rule breaking, you know, all of the songs that are nominated and all the songs that weren't nominated have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars of promotion behind them with major studios.
Our assignment when we were doing it was to write a song as inspirational as Amazing Grace before Amazing Grace ever existed. We tried to make it simple, universal, and just timeless.
Memorable.
And memorable.
Many see the Academy's move as bigotry against Alone Yet Not Alone's song and message. Other members of the Academy, including famous film composer Hans Zimmer, calls the ruling unfair. But Johnny hopes that good will come from the controversy surrounding the song.
Well, when I heard the nomination was rescinded, my first thought was, oh, come on, really? But God's purposes are working out, because some of this controversy, I think, might be drawing more attention to the song and even to the film than had it just sailed through to the Oscars.
Charlene Israel, CBN News, Hollywood, California.
I agree with Johnny there. Well, in other news, Pastor Rick Warren is taking on a new mental health ministry inspired by his own personal tragedy. Warren's son Matthew committed suicide last April. He had struggled with severe depression for years. Now Pastor Warren is teaming up with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange, California, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness to host a day-long event next month. Warren says the conference will address a range of mental health issues, from bipolar disorder to suicide to more easily hidden issues such as anxiety, eating disorders, and addiction. Up next, the man behind the music. A look at the life of Harry T. Burley. You may not know his name, but you've probably heard his music. Harry T. Burley was the grandson of a slave and one of the most influential people in American music. In the first half of the 20th century, he shined as a world-class composer, arranger, and artistic pioneer. But his legacy goes even deeper. The African-American musician played a huge role in bridging the racial divide at the height of Jim Crow America. Burley is the subject of the new book, Nobody Knows, the Harry T. Burley Story. Our Wendy Griffith recently spoke with author Craig Von Busick about the life of this musical pioneer.
And author Craig Von Busick joins me now to tell us more about Harry T. Burley. Craig, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, tell us, what are some of the songs that we might recognize from Harry T. Burley?
Well, the book is called Nobody Knows, and I worked with Baker Publishing on the title, and I thought it was a great idea because everybody knows the song Nobody Knows. I mean, it's even in The Lion King.
You mean nobody knows?
You sing it wonderfully. Yeah, just like that bird in The Lion King. So everybody knows that song, but nobody knows that Harry T. Burley was one of the first people to make it known to the rest of the world. Now, again, nobody knows who wrote that song.
Right.
That emerged out of times when the slaves would come together illegally in the woods, and they would cry out to God for freedom. And spontaneously, the Holy Spirit would work through them and bring forth what Paul calls spiritual songs, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And these songs would emerge, and they meant so much to them that they were passed along orally, which was the African tradition to pass things along orally. Well, it came down, and after the Civil War, a lot of years went by, and they didn't want to remember them because they were so painful. But the next generation, which Burley was a part of, they made them known to the world, and more than anybody else, that's what Harry T. Burley was known for.
Now, what would be another song that we might, because everybody's heard Nobody Knows, what would be another one that
Were You There When They Crucified My Lord? Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, The Gospel Train, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho.
Oh,
I could go on and on and on.
Now, as a black man in the early 20th century, Burley must have faced a lot of obstacles. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, I share a story where he was invited to the hotel, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, to meet John McCormick, who was the Elvis or this Frank Sinatra of his day. He was an Irish tenor, and Burley was not allowed to go to meet him on the regular elevators. He had to go use the freight elevator. This is New York City in the 1920s. We think of it, oh, the South, that's where all the racism was, but he wasn't allowed to go there. So McCormick came down and said, change your policy now or I'm leaving. They wouldn't change the policy, so he left and he never went back to the Ritz-Carlton. That's only one of many stories that we tell about in the book of what he faced at that time.
Craig, Burley was obviously a man of faith. Tell us about his relationship with God.
Well, his mother taught from the Hebrew Bible, in the Episcopal Church in our hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. That's how I know about him. And so he grew up in the church. He'd go to the Episcopal Church in the morning, and then in the afternoon, he'd take his grandfather to the mission where they'd sing the spirituals. Then when he got to New York City, he did the same thing all over again. He was involved in the Episcopal Church, but he brought the spirituals to that church. In fact, they used to have a yearly celebratory service of the spirituals that eventually NBC and CBS Radio picked up and posted across the country. But there's one story about his faith that stands out. He used to go before anyone else went to the church, and he would sit there and pray on Sunday mornings. And the pastor would always come in and say, "How are you doing, Mr. Burley?" And he would just say, "I'm just getting a feel for the place." And it was just his time to be with God in that wonderful, beautiful sanctuary in New York City. So he loved God, and he brought the Lord's word to the world through the spirituals.
Well, this is fascinating. Craig Von Busick is author of Nobody Knows, the Harry T. Burley story. You can find it on Amazon and wherever books are sold, also Barnes & Noble. Craig, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure.
Sounds like a wonderful book. Well, up next, a love that has thrived for 3 generations. Commitment. That's the reason one married couple says they've lasted nearly a century. Clara and Delbert started dating when they were in high school back in 1931. The two got married years later in 1933 during the Great Depression. And although they were madly in love with each other, things weren't always easy, but they lived through it.
We got married. We said we were going to stay married, and if it was a bad day, we went on until a day that was good. I never was tempted, and I'm sure he wasn't. He didn't have time.
Wow, married 80 years. Well, Clara and Delbert have 4 daughters, 13 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren. Wow, what a blessed marriage. That's all for this edition of Newswatch. Remember, you can email us your comments and questions at newswatch@cbn.com. Hope you'll join us next time.